On September 26, 1975, my husband was assassinated. He was a labor leader. I am a Salvadorian mother, a working-class mother, mother of 3 children who have disappeared. My son died from burns received from gasoline applied to all parts of his body, even his testicles and rectum. He had cuts, bruises, and broken bones all over his body. He was tortured in the face with electric shock and hemorrhage from his nose, mouth, and ears. My son died after 8 days of agonizing pain. This is Elsa, a combatant from the Central Front. She tells about fighting which went on for 8 days, but she says that they suffered only light losses, about 3. But many civilians were killed because the soldiers went to where the civilian population had taken refuge and killed many of them there. Survivors later made statements that the soldiers who were massacring the people were tall, blue or green-eyed white men, and they assumed that these soldiers were the American advisors. My name is Gloria Marina. I was a member of a student association, and later I was with the health brigade at the Central Front. My father, a union leader, was assassinated 6 years ago. My oldest brother was a student leader. Because they were both killed fighting for the people, I have joined in the struggle as a combatant to follow their example. Many women are fighting. Many. What I used to do with my sons was to distribute leaflets in town and paint slogans on the walls. We go directly to the people of El Salvador on the rebel side tonight, and particularly take a look at the position and function of women in rebel society.
En El Salvador, hombres y mujeres
in El Salvador, women and men of the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, the FMLN, and the Democratic Revolutionary Front, the FDR, are struggling together against a fascist regime, and they are trying to construct a revolutionary democratic government capable of ending the genocide and bringing peace to their homeland.
Mi nombre es Berta Deras de Aguiñada.
My name is Berta Dera de Aguinada. On September 26, 1975, a day like today, my husband, Rafael Aguinada Carranza, was assassinated by a band of fascists. He was a union leader, Secretary General of the United Labor Federation, the FUS, and labor representative in the Legislative Assembly. Rafael was a man who dedicated his whole life to the struggle of his people, to defend the interests of the people in the working class, Together, from a very young age, we dedicated ourselves completely to the struggle for the interests of the Salvadorian people.
Estando en ese hogar, en ese hogar,
It was into this kind of home that our 3 children were born. The eldest, Rafael Aquinada, joined the struggle very early, and 4 months ago, in a street here in San Salvador, his life was taken also.
En una calle de aquí de San Salvador. Yo quiero en este día.
Today, I want to ask something of all the women of the world. I want to ask you to join in solidarity with the struggle of our people. Only with the massive solidarity that you can build, we will finally win our liberation. Only with this solidarity will we be able to stop the genocide of our people and live so that our people will never again suffer misery, hunger, and slavery.
Soy madre salvadoreña, Concepción de Díaz.
I am a Salvadorian mother, Concepcion del Villa. I'm a working-class mother and mother of 3 children, all of whom have disappeared. It was when Molina became president and ordered the military occupation of the university that my son Ricardo disappeared. He hasn't been heard from since. My other son was captured in front of the Salvadorian Air Force Base on May 26, 1980. The authorities don't admit that he was captured. He has not been before any tribunal, and I know nothing about his whereabouts. The disappearance of my children cuts through me like a piercing knife. I wait for some news of my adored children. On August 15th, Luisa was captured in a private house in the Escalonia area of San Salvador. I trust in God, the Eternal Father, that my children may still be alive. I ask all of the mothers of the world to join in solidarity with us, the mothers who are suffering the sorrow of having our children held in the Salvadorian jails. I ask God's mercy for my children. Where are my children?
¿Dónde está Ricardo Adán? ¿Dónde está Luis Adalberto? ¿Dónde está Mauricio Rigoberto? Me llamo Blanca de Baires. Soy salvadoreña, profesora.
My name is Blanca de Viares. I am a Salvadoran teacher. I taught for 40 years in a Catholic high school. My youngest son, Jaime, received his degree in political economy in the University of Paris, Ocho Vancing in France, and then taught classes in the National University of El-Salvador. As part of the savage political repression being waged by the military tyranny, my son was captured February 23rd and submitted to cruel tortures for 2 days in the presidential offices and the National Guard.
Durante 2 días en Casa Presidencial y la Guardia Nacional. Mi hijo murió.
My son died from the burns produced by the acetylene applied to all parts of his body, even his testicles and rectum.
Incluso en los testículos y en el recto.
He had cuts, bruises, and fractures all over his body. He was tortured in the face with electric shock that caused hemorrhages from his nose, mouth, and ears.
Que le causaron hemorragias de la nariz, la boca y los oídos.
My son died after 8 days of agonizing pain.
Después de 8 días de dolorosa agonía. 3 días antes de su muerte.
3 days before his death, I went to the private house of the most criminal military officer in all of El Salvador, the one who orders the tortures of the young people that are taken prisoner, Major Roberto de Abusón. I went to ask him why my son had been tortured like that. At first, he said my son had done it to himself. I answered that even the most uneducated person wouldn't believe that. Then he said that it was an error, a mistake, I told him that I was going to denounce him before all of Central America and the entire world. He said before I did, I should have considered the consequences. I told him that the only possible consequence would be my death, but that my denunciation would still be heard throughout the world.
Mi nombre es Alicia Nerio de Blandino, madre de
My name is Alicia Nerio de Blandino. I'm a mother of a political prisoner, Roger, who was released after 16 long months in the filthy cells of the National Guard and the Santa Tecla jail. We began fighting for the liberty of our sons and daughters and the Salvadorian people after the massacres of July 30th, 1975, when large numbers of people first disappeared. We have continued the struggle, occupying churches, government offices, and international organizations like the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and others, in order to win the freedom of political prisoners and to discover the whereabouts of the people who have disappeared without a trace. We harbor the hope that on the day our people triumph, we will find our sons and daughters and release them from the jails of El-Salvador.
Daremos nuestra vida por la patria, por verla liberada lucharemos, la paz en esta tierra sembraremos, trabajando día a día viviremos, tiranos y asesinos ya no habrán, los niños por las calles jugarán, los vientos de justicia volverán, y a todo nuestro pueblo soplarán. Ven salvadoreño, vamos a luchar, porque al fascismo hay que derrotar. Ven salvadoreño, vamos a luchar, la patria espera por su libertad.
Elsa, una combatiente en el volcán Guazapa.
This is Elsa, a combatant of the Central Front, Modesto Ramírez, in the area of the volcano of Guazapa. She has been part of the resistance against 7 enemy offensives.
Pero salieron pues
shocked by the brutality of the troops against the civilian population around Guazapa, she tells us the following. This time, we were fighting for 8 days, but our forces suffered very few losses, only about 3. But there were many civilians killed because the soldiers went to where the civilian population had taken refuge and killed many of them. Survivors later made statements that the soldiers who were massacring the people were tall, blue, or green-eyed white men, who they assumed were the American advisors.
Mi nombre es Gloria Marina, pertenezco al Frente Paracentral llamado Anastasia King.
My name is Gloria Marina, and I am on the Paracentral Front for Anastasio Akin. I used to be a member of a student association and later was part of a health brigade on the Central Front, but now I am a combatant. My father, who was a union leader, was assassinated 6 years ago. My oldest brother was a student leader and he also was killed. And so I've decided to join the struggle to follow their example and the example of all of our fallen comrades. We have problems here at the front, but we've fought off the enemy and they haven't been able to defeat us. The civilians here teach us how to grow things, and we protect them. We show them how to use arms, and they show us everything about life here. We've heard about the solidarity movements with our people. We think that the French-Mexican position is a very good one, especially the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front as the real force of the Salvadorian people.
Soy Nadia Palacios, miembro del Estado Mayor aquí en el Frente Occidental.
I am Nadia Palacios, in the headquarters of the Eastern Front, Feliciano Ama. In this front, men and women together are active in the revolutionary war to win freedom and happiness for our people. In this front, we all take part, men and women, in all tasks of the war. This is a necessity in the face of the cruel reality of the policy of aggression of U.S. imperialism and its puppets. Presently, 31% of the U.S. military aid to Latin America is destined for the military Christian Democratic Junta of El Salvador. That aid signifies more bombings, more and newer helicopters, more sophisticated arms for attacking our people, and the use of new methods like chemical war, thus obliging us to strengthen ourselves on every front. We women especially are active in all parts of the struggle. Here in our front, women are in the guerrilla ranks, in military leadership, in communications, and everything that is needed. Our people are not warmongers or aggressors. The war is an inevitable part of the process toward our liberation, and is a contribution towards real peace in the Central American region and toward the development of peace worldwide.
Más allá de nuestras fronteras, en los campos de refugio,
along the borders and the refugee camps, the women are a testament to suffering, struggle, and hope.
Fuimos a tomar una finca con la Liga Popular y entonces a mí me invitaron.
We went with the Real People's Leagues to occupy the farm. They invited me along because I used to work on that farm. I had earned pretty good money there. I took my children with me and we went with the leagues to occupy the farm. Someone blew the whistle on us, and because we knew it, bombs were being thrown at us. We were there with the young ones, and they called me over and gave me a pistol. But I told them I didn't have the nerve to use it, even though I saw a young girl aiming a .45. They told us not to try to run away, or the soldiers would kill us. So we stayed with them and were captured. We were not hurt, but many others died there. That was when the Archbishop was still alive, and he came and asked for our release. Finally, after 11 days, they let us go, but I saw that out of 100, only 25 of us were left. It makes me sick to think about what I saw during the massacre. I even saw a baby sucking blood at his stepmother's breast. I was worried too about my children, who had gone with the young ones to look for refuge for us. The guard arrived where we were hiding and called out, "Come out, you son of a bitches." An old man said, "Let's go, let's go. We'll beg for peace." Some did go out and they were beaten. I stayed there without making a sound. I couldn't think of everything but how near I was to death. I crossed myself and thought, God's will be done. Only God can help me now. One of the young ones told me not to go behind the farmhouse because everyone there was being killed. So I went the other way, and there we were, all right. One of my daughters, Lola, told me later, Mama, over there the soldiers had everyone on the ground, and there was a tank near the place where we used to get paid. One of the young ones got the tank, or we would all have been killed. It was terrible. The Archbishop denounced the massacre and sent a priest down here to help us get the bodies for burial. It took us 11 days to get them because they didn't want to turn them over.
Who's responsible for the deaths in El Salvador?
The armed forces, because they started the killing. There, a sergeant got up above everyone and declared, "We are brave." Then he said, "With your permission, we have our balls in the right place. We will win." Oh God, I said to myself, what are they going to win? They were dragging the girls off by the hair. I really felt sorry for them. They were beating them with their rifles and threatening us so we wouldn't interfere. Then the sergeant got up there again, and if I had had a gun, I would have shot him. But without weapons, one is nothing. With a weapon, you can do something, but without, what can you do? As for my children, one of my daughters left, and people were asking me, "Why did you bring so many children?" I told them because we were afraid. My daughter said to me one day, "I'm going, Mama, I'm going to fight." And I told her, "Well, then go." I didn't even see her go. She just left. But she wrote me not long ago. The women in El Salvador are fighting. They are fighting against the guard. Many of them are fighting because just imagine, one woman here, Felipa Guadaldo, had 2 sons killed. Now her daughter, Conchita, has gone to fight. Many women are fighting, many. When we were back there, there weren't enough arms. If there had been enough arms, more of us would have stayed to fight. We hear a lot of talk here, but if all we have is talk, and the armed forces win, what are we going to do then? Because here they took away everything, even our cooking knives, so that we would not have nothing to fight with. They even took our razor blades. Even that was prohibited, they said. What I used to do with my sons was distribute leaflets in town and paint slogans on the walls. That's what they told us to do. When I became afraid, Felipe's son told me, "Don't be afraid, Niña Tina. We have to die someday." And it's true. We have to die someday, but one still fears death. But he said, "Come on, you have to do this, because the others have other work to do." "I'm Manuel," I said, "don't get involved." "Why, of course I will, Niña Tina," he said. "What happened in our town makes a person mad. God knows. We have to work, to struggle, and we are going to win." One of my daughters went with me to Limpa to work. One time when we were there gathering watermelons, she said, "With God's help, someday we will be able to walk freely over this same earth." Another answered her, "Don't be stupid. The armed forces run everything here." But she answered him back, "With God's help, that will change. We're going to fight to be free."
Las mujeres salvadoreñas, con nuestra lucha,
Through their struggle, the women of El Salvador have won the right to solidarity with all the women of the world. They ask for, they demand solidarity, not just with the women, but with all the people of the world.
Te regalo una paz iluminada, un racimo de paz y de gorriones, una banda de mieses aromada, California de melocotones, una Asia sin Corea ensangrentada, una Corea en flor y otra en botones, una América en frutos sazonada y un mundo con azúcar de melones. paz y su locura. Te regalo un clavel meditabundo para tu blanca mano de criatura. Y en tu sueño que tiembla estremecido, hoy te dejo la paz sobre tu mundo. De niño por la muerte sorprendido, hoy te dejo la paz sobre tu mundo. De niño por la muerte sorprendido, una hacia sin Corea ensangrentada, una Corea en flor y otra en botones, una América en frutos sazonada y un mundo con azúcar de melones.
It's very rare to see or hear a spokesperson from the rebel side in El Salvador. I heard a rumor, somebody told me that it's now CBS policy that they will not interview a rebel leader of any stripe without specific approval by a CBS executive. I've never been able to track that down to see if that actually was the truth, but this is what the person said. Well, CBS may feel that way, but we're going to show you something that you won't see on CBS, and that is a documentary made by the rebels in El Salvador. It's about the participation, situation, and status of women on that side of the conflict in El Salvador. We also will play for you a section of a tape we had previously, about 3 years ago, in which a Cox News Service reporter told about his experiences in El Salvador. He was wounded, picked up by the people sympathetic to the rebels, and he was actually taken to the rebel side and stayed there until he recovered. So he had some eyewitness reports on what life was like there with the rebel-held territory. But first, let's have some news stories. Doug, you have something relevant to El Salvador, do you not?
Yes. Today in the New York Times, that is on January the 23rd, there was a story that the leaders of the rebel forces in El Salvador said that Duarte, pressed by the right, shuns talks. The president of El Salvador, Napoleon Duarte, in November of last year initiated talks with the rebels the people hoped would bring peace in El Salvador. There were 2 series of talks, and there were great hopes that they might be able to bring a political solution to this conflict. But the rebel leaders say that Duarte just isn't talking anymore, that he's broken off the talks, and that he got pressured from the right, from the military and different right-wing political groups, to break off the talks, and that he's frightened to pursue a policy of peace because of the pressure from the hawks in his government, and that they've ground to a halt this peace initiative.
I've received copies of Barricada International, which is an international weekly put out by the Sandinistas down in Nicaragua. And they point out some things which is also specified by a film we showed a while back, in which it was indicated how many Western European countries support the Sandinista government. And a lot of this information, of course, never gets in the regular media because the government and the system doesn't want it. So we found out that other people are supporting the Nicaraguans. For instance, the vice president of the Association of Social Democratic Jurists of West Germany visited Nicaragua. His organization has 8,000 people and is the largest of its kind in Europe. And he praised the Nicaraguans for the people who are participating in the system of justice, not just standing around waiting for it to happen. And it says that the law is exercised through the people. And he also said that the open penitentiary system and youth rehabilitation programs in Nicaragua are some of the finest in the world. There was also a visitor from France, the former Prime Minister of France and the current mayor of the city of Lille and president of the World Federation of United Cities. He was in Nicaragua, and he was over there expressing his solidarity and friendship with the people of Nicaragua. And there was a Congress in Greece, a Greek Women's Federation held in Athens. They discussed the situation of the U.S. armed intervention in Nicaragua, and they also expressed their solidarity with the Nicaraguans. Most of the world is pro-Sandinista. The United States and a few of its close lackeys like England are against them.
In fact, one of the ways that the U.S. has been putting pressure on Nicaragua is to try to establish a permanent base in Honduras, which is next to Nicaragua, that will have at least 5,000 American troops permanently stationed there. Well, the New York Times reported on January 23rd that talks between the Reagan administration and the Honduras government had failed to effect a settlement of this problem. Reagan sent his national security advisor and many other top military and political officials to try to negotiate with the Honduras government to establish a permanent base there. The Hondurans want a special security pact from the United States and a much higher level of political and military aid, and the settlement just couldn't be reached in these negotiations. In particular, the Honduras government is very disturbed that there's 12,000 Nicaragua Contras that are established and based in their country. And they're worried that these people might commit crimes against their people. They're wondering how long they're going to be there. They're worried that perhaps Nicaragua might invade Honduras because of the raids from the Contras coming from Honduran territory. And so far, the United States hasn't been able to satisfy the worries that the Hondurans have, or to give them enough increase in economic aid to make this worthwhile. There's another story coming out of Honduras that's worth mentioning because it really hasn't got much play in the media. And that is, in mid-January of this year, 21 American soldiers were killed in a plane crash in Honduras. Some of the troops stationed there were flying on military maneuvers, and their plane crashed in the fog, and 21 of them were killed. This calls attention once again to the high cost in American lives of Ronald Reagan's foreign policy. Hundreds of U.S. troops were killed in Lebanon. A number were killed in Grenada. Some American advisors have been assassinated in El Salvador. There's been reports in the Detroit Free Press that didn't get out in the American media that American troops were actually killed in combat in Nicaragua, and now there's 22 who have been killed in Honduras. So we really aren't aware of the amount of people that are being killed to satisfy Ronald Reagan's foreign policy initiative. It's amazing how he just doesn't get bad publicity on these things. Again, all the story was about his triumphant inauguration during this period.
Now here's another article that was from the Wall Street Journal at the end of December. A report came out that says that only 1 in 4 U.S. households has sufficient income now to support the mortgage on a median-priced house. With the median price nationally now about $80,000, the monthly payment, including taxes and insurance, on a 90% 30-year mortgage at 13%, which is about your average rate now, will be $894 a month. Now, younger households are clustered more toward the lower and middle segments of the income spectrum, so the affordability problem has become even more acute for them. Maybe we can interest you in a no-bedroom, low-cost hovel. This is something out of the Austin paper. The political writer Dave McNeely, who's been around for years through good times and bad, came up with a neat little piece last week. Well, you're wondering what our government's been doing here in Texas. We got a first-class government, let me tell you. Dave McNeely says, and I quote, "Don't worry about the state being out of money. The potential problem in the Texas Senate this year is brassieres on women reporters. Actually, it's the potential lack of bras that has Steve Guest, the new Senate Sergeant-at-Arms, worried. He cautioned reporters at a briefing last week that bras are part of the quote-unquote proper attire for women reporters and for other women who come into the Senate. Asked which senator had expressed concern about the potential bralessness, Guest replied that bras are included in his own definition of proper decorum. And I quote, "It's not written," he said. "It's just my definition of professional attire for women." He mentioned that a stripper had va-va-voomed her way down to a G-string in front of some House members during the '83 regular session. He was reminded that the incident had taken place in a Capitol hallway and not in the House chamber. Nonetheless, Guest said, "It's just part of my job to see that strange things do not happen." Thanks, Steve. He said he wanted to make sure that women realize that wearing a brassiere is as important to Senate decorum as men wearing socks and ties and not wearing shorts and blue jeans. Thank you, Steve. Ignorance marches on.
It's always interesting to see what you find in a right-wing newspaper. The Spotlight talks about the U.S. Office of Technology Assessment, this is a congressional organization, of the Star Wars program, which Reagan and his people are pushing. It says that it won't work. Even if it were 99% effective, Why, that'd mean just a mere 100 missiles or so would come in and destroy the United States. And even at that, the article says that the Star Wars system won't protect us against bomber launched missiles or submarine launched missiles, and it certainly won't do anything to stop cruise missiles. So that's not only unsafe, but it's absurd. The newspaper goes on to say that it's the same motivation that cost this country so much blood and treasure in this century, the greed for power and profits. But it also points out something else which I haven't seen before, and that is that Star Wars has been endorsed by David Rockefeller's Trilateral Commission, that organization which provides so many leaders to the our national government, as well as ideas and policy to the national government. So the article sums up the forces that motivated Reagan to romanticize about ending the threat of war is being sold to the American public that longs for peace, and to a generation born on a bullseye, as the ultimate security blanket. It will guarantee to generate huge profits and huge deficits. Only problem is it won't work.
In fact, finally Caspar Weinberger let the cat out of the bag, admitting one of the points was made in that article, and that is it's not enough to have a Star Wars system that will knock all Soviet missiles out of the air as they're launched from ICBMs in the Soviet Union. You also have to take care of Soviet bombers. In fact, Weinberger said that after they finance the Star Wars program, they then have to finance a system of defensive missiles and protection against the Soviet bombers, such as cruise missiles that would be carried on airplanes. So we're talking about an incredible multi-trillion-dollar boondoggle here for defensive purposes. It's not going to just stop with Star Wars. They would have to completely rebuild the defensive ground capacity here in the United States that they gave up on as being impossible some decades ago, and they would have to start all over rebuilding this ground defense system to quote-unquote guarantee that we couldn't be harmed by enemy missiles or airplanes in nuclear war. And this is just impossible, and we're going to bankrupt ourselves to carry out these so-called defensive programs with the illusion that we can make ourselves safe from nuclear war.
But if Reagan says it, it must be right, because he's smiling.
Speaking of some of the nasty things Reagan has been doing, and again, he hasn't been getting negative publicity about this so far, at least on the television program, and that is on January the 14th, the Reagan administration announced that 16 people, including the pastor of the Southside Presbyterian Church in Tucson, Arizona, several Roman Catholic priests and nuns, had been indicted on 71 counts of conspiracy to smuggle illegal aliens into the United States and other related charges. These church people were part of a sanctuary movement that said that oppressed people in countries like Guatemala, El-Salvador, Honduras, etc., who were fleeing from political prosecution in that country should be allowed to come into the United States and seek sanctuary. So a lot of these religious people were carrying out underground railroads and smuggling people from El Salvador, for instance, into this country where they were being put in sanctuaries in churches. Well, the Reagan administration decided to move against these church groups and has so far set out indictments against some of the religious people involved in the sanctuary movement, and they threatened to arrest and to deport some of the Salvadorians and Guatemalans that are actually living now in these church sanctuaries, which are all over the country, in Tucson, Arizona, in Illinois, in Austin, Texas, and other parts. In Texas, there's religious groups active in the sanctuary movement. This is going to make for pleasant television when they come and start arresting priests, nuns, Protestant ministers, and others. And the members of this movement say they're going to continue. They interviewed in the Times some of the people active, and they say they're going to go on until they're arrested. So this is a potential conflict that the Reagan administration is going to have.
And now we'll talk with Clifford Krause, Cox News Service correspondent, who inadvertently spent some time with the guerrillas in El Salvador. Mike Conroy joins us.
We heard in November of your last trip perhaps in a way that you didn't expect us to hear about your last trip, when Julia Preston reported on National Public Radio of the encounter you had both with guerrillas and with the Army, in which you were wounded. Do you want to tell us about that and what it tells you about things which are going on in El Salvador?
Sure. The three of us, we were also with Bob Rivard of the Dallas Times-Herald, were driving from San Salvador to Morazan to speak to local military commanders and hopefully witness the Red Cross withdraw prisoners of war from the guerrilla zones. We were 1/3 of the way there when we were passing on the Pan American Highway just east of San Vicente. We came across a guerrilla roadblock. And we were with 3 young guerrillas at the time attempting to pass through the roadblock when the Army swept through, attacking the roadblock and the guerrillas, and we were with them. And I was shot in the head. Very luckily, it was only a ricochet, and the bullet lodged between my skull and scalp, so I wasn't seriously hurt. What perhaps was most interesting about the incident was not my being wounded, but the way a few peasants came by and picked us up and actually saved us, because we were under fire sporadically for 10 or 15 minutes. They came by and took us to a hut where the people had cotton and alcohol, and where I was able to receive a bit of care so that eventually we could go back to San Salvador and I could go to a hospital to have the bullet removed. Once again, this was evidence of this invisible network of support that is out there for the guerrillas. And most interesting, perhaps, was the fact that Radio Venceremos, one of the 2 guerrilla radio stations, reported my being wounded before the American wire services had the story, before the local press had the story. And so the communications out there that the guerrillas have is perhaps the most sophisticated and developed communications network that there is. That the guerrillas are there in the guise of not only armed men, but common peasants.
Didn't that make you a marked man? The fact that they said that you were there and on their side at the time, wouldn't that make you a marked man for the government? They're liable to do you in?
No, I don't think so. It was an accidental sort of thing. There was a roadblock. Other people had been stopped as well as us. We were not seeking out the guerrillas. In fact, we were on our way to speak to local military commanders. So, and the guerrillas left us there, and which was fortunate for us. They escaped. And the fact of the matter is, at that particular time, we were about to be asked for a war tax. The guerrillas, when they stop vehicles at roadblocks, demand a contribution, which is their form of taxation. So in no way do I feel marked because of this experience at all. And Radio Venceremos ran the story that I had been hurt, but they didn't even use my name. They didn't know who I was.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well, now you did spend time behind the lines with the guerrillas. Can you tell me about your experiences and your opinion of the guerrillas?
I spent 3 weeks in the mountains of Chalatenango with the FPL guerrillas in 1982. And I did a series of stories and a story for The Nation magazine on my experiences up there. What I discovered was another El Salvador altogether. I hiked for days and days through villages that had been abandoned and burned down by the armed forces, churches that had been sacked and destroyed by the armed forces, and areas that had been organized by the church and eventually the popular organizations and the guerrillas, in some places up to a decade. And villages where I saw no guerrillas at all, but this was behind the lines. Everyone was a guerrilla, from the children who were studying in revolutionary schools in places that hadn't had teachers except for prostitutes who were being punished for years and years, and organizations of women and peasants who had been organized in cooperatives for many years by the church. And all of these people now are in another El Salvador, another nation that is with the FMLN.
So what did you see as far as, say, the women's participation? You mentioned that.
Yes. Well, in the villages that I visited, and there were several, and these guerrilla camps are not what you might imagine, where there were tents and just guerrillas isolated from the population. No. These were villages, small villages, isolated, where guerrillas and people lived together. Everyone is organized, and there are what they call, there is people's power. Local governments that are semi-autonomous, members are democratically elected in the local governments. Within these governments, there are women's committees. Women who take care of such very vital social functions as sanitation, education, and food distribution. Many of these women come through the church organizations, and in fact knew Ida Ford and Maura Clark very, very well, the two of the 4 American church women who were murdered in El Salvador. These were women who received their training and political and social outlook from these American nuns participating in base communities and receiving what is called the celebration of the Word, popular Christian Bible readings with a strong political and social perspective.
And a lot of women are actually toting rifles and out there in the front lines.
Absolutely. There is no question. I would say perhaps 5% of the guerrillas are women. Now, when I was with the FPL in Chalatenango, at the time they were just beginning to form their vanguard units, their shock troops, rapid deployment force that would be used for attack, and as the advance group to break through encirclements of the army to take the civilian population through army lines to escape, which has to be done all the time. In these vanguard units, I met several teenage girls. You can't call them girls, they're women, because with rock-hard handshakes, who are able to hike for days and days on a can of sardines and fight the National Guard and then come back to their camps. And I'm talking about women who are 15 years old, 17 years old, who see themselves as feminists and see themselves as proving that women can not only be equal in the home, but equal in battle.
One problem that comes to the shores of the United States whenever there is a coup of progressive forces which throws out right-wing dictatorships is that the United States brings those people into the country, the deposed people. And so what happens is that we get these cores of repressive right-wing people in the United States, and they in turn start trying to stamp out any people of their own national origin who disagree with them, or who work for the new government, or who worked against them when they in turn were abroad before the revolution. This has happened with the Cuban exiles here in the United States, who were kicked out when Castro's revolution succeeded. It occurred with the Vietnam refugees here. There's a strong element, particularly on the West Coast, which takes care and has actually carried out murders of some pro-Vietnam people, those who were not in support of the old Saigon government. And there are also some people from Korea who do not support the present Korean government, have been offed by some of their folks. Well, it seems that Taiwan is involved in this. Henry Liu, a well-known critic of Taiwan's right-wing government, was murdered in San Francisco, and later on it was confirmed that the Bamboo Gang, a well-organized gang of thugs in Taiwan, some 10,000 professional criminals, actually did the job. Now, the Bamboo Gang has been proven to work closely with the Taiwanese intelligence network in Taiwan. It says that the links between the gang and the Taiwan government are common knowledge. And no doubt people out there on the coast don't have any doubts that the gang frequently carries out illegal strong-arm operations on behalf of the repressive regime there in Taiwan. So we just bring in more and more garbage every time there's a revolution that kicks out the bad guy.
In fact, the Barton Creek rapist, the person alleged to be the rapist, is one of these Cuban refugees from Marial.
Here in Austin?
Here in Austin, Texas.
Oh, that was one that where Castro opened up his prison doors and spewed them all out in the United States.
Interestingly enough, I read an article just today in the New York Times where Castro denied that this was the case. He said he didn't let anyone out of mental institutions and he didn't let any violent criminals out. He said he would be stupid to do this because these people could be recruited by the CIA and used against them if they were violent criminals. He said he did let petty criminals out, and that a group of other people who weren't held in prison just took advantage of this, who had violent propensities just to come over to the United States. I mean, I'd read, repeatedly in the media that Castro had played a trick on Jimmy Carter by giving his most incorrigible criminals and hopeless mental patients,
whom the right wing called freedom fighters, and they're
and Castro denies this. I mean, what the truth is, it's hard to know.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is interesting.
It was also interesting that Castro said he was going to take back a lot of these people as well.
In agreement for the U.S. to accept 10,000 Cubans a year who want to leave Cuba. In fact, it's usually claimed that Castro is setting up some sort of prison system there where he won't let people out. And in fact, it's been the U.S. government that has been reluctant to let too many Cubans in. And now Castro made a deal that he would take back 1,000 people from the Marial expedition who are still in prison in the U.S. a month if the U.S. will accept 10,000 Cubans that just want to leave a year. So he's happy to get rid of the people that don't want to be there, I
have a couple more shorts from our own Texas Observer. And two Washington Post reporters said that 20 Democratic fat cats met on November 27th in Washington to organize what they called the Money Caucus. The meeting began with an obligatory thank you for the former Golden Boy, Walter Mondale, who was then escorted from the room by Bethesda developer Nathan Landau in order to allow the group to plan for the future. Chicago developer Thomas Rosenberg explained the influence of those in the meeting. Quote, "We don't have to do anything. We have a certain viewpoint that is, say, moderate or centrist, and we are major fundraisers." Well, according to the Post, the group is intent upon backing a presidential candidate who will move the party further to the right, to their moderate or centrist business-oriented position. Oh boy, just what we need, some more political fat cats. And on another front, there were a record number of delegates to the 5th National Major Conference of the Freeze Campaign held in St. Louis, 732 in all. Freeze leader Randall Forsberg reported to the December 10th meeting that when she met with David Yankelovich, the veteran pollster, he told her there had been a massive shift in thinking. Fully 90% of all Americans now believe the arms race is a very serious problem and that they will not survive a nuclear war. Says Yankelovich, "Be patient. You have altered history as no other movement has." I think that somebody better cue Ron on this thing. Where's Nancy when you really need her?
There was an interesting court decision in Vermont on November the 16th of this year in which 26 anti-war activists were acquitted of the charges of unlawful trespass which was a protest that they had done against Reagan's Central American policies. They had occupied for 3 days a Vermont state senator's office to protest the U.S. intervention in Central America and had been arrested for trespassing, and they defended their occupation on the grounds that they were protesting against illegal and criminal activities. And during the trial, in effect, they put U.S. Central American policy on trial and had people like Ramsey Clark testifying, some El Salvador refugees who talked of their friends and families being murdered by death squads. John Stockwell testified how the CIA was dominating U.S. policy in Central America. And lo and behold, the jury acquitted them of charges of trespassing, which is the first time that anti-war activists have been given more or less a veneer of legality to their nonviolent protests, that in certain conditions it's valid to do things like occupation to protest policies that are held to be against U.S. interest.
And finally, from the Observer, 18% of the South lives in poverty, according to a new study. That's 1 in 5. The Southern Regional Council found the poverty rate increasing in the 11 southern states, including Texas. There's a quote here: "I think a fair assessment is that we're losing the war on poverty, and we in the South started losing it in 1979 and 1980, the director of the council told the Associated Press." So I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all you snowbirds to the promised land.
And that's Alternative Views for this evening.